Every week, millions of Australians reach into the supermarket fridge and grab a tray of mince. It's cheap, it's fast, it's familiar. It goes into bolognese, it goes into tacos, it goes into the kids' dinner on a Tuesday night without a second thought. But here's something worth sitting with for a moment. A product that looks virtually identical across dozens of brands, dozens of trays, and dozens of fridges, yet carries almost no legal obligation to tell you where the animal came from, how the cut was graded, or who actually made it. Today we're pulling back the packaging on supermarket mince in Australia. 8 things that consumer advocates, food scientists, and ordinary shoppers are raising questions about right now and what you can actually do about it. We'll work from number 8 through to number 1, and the concerns do get more serious as we go. Stick around because number 3 in particular caught us completely off guard, and towards the end, we'll cover 4 genuinely better alternatives at every price point. Let's start unpacking. Number 8. Country of origin, the label that tells only half the story. Most shoppers assume that a tray of Australian beef mince sitting in a Coles or Woolworths fridge is straightforwardly Australian beef, and often it is. But the consumer belief and the technical legal reality are 2 different things. Under Australian country of origin labelling laws, a product can display the Australian-made logo if it has been substantially transformed here, even if the raw material originated overseas. For beef mince specifically, that means imported frozen beef can be ground and packaged in Australia, and in certain circumstances, qualify for labelling that most shoppers would interpret as locally produced. According to the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission, labelling must not be misleading, and the rules were tightened after a 2016 review. Many products now carry percentage bars showing how much of the content by weight is Australian. But consumer advocates have pointed out that these bars are small, the language is technical, and most shoppers don't read them under supermarket lighting while managing a trolley and 2 kids. Why does this matter? For many consumers, buying Australian beef is about supporting local farmers. It's also, for some, about food safety standards and traceability. If the product in the tray has a more complicated international origin story than the label suggests, that's information consumers arguably deserve to understand clearly. Here's where things get more layered though, because country of origin is actually one of the more regulated corners of this space. The next issue sits in a far less transparent area entirely. Number 7. Fat content tolerances. What Lee and Axel advance at the counterly means at the counterly means at the counter walk through any supermarket mince section and you'll see fat percentages on most products. 3-star lean. Extra lean, 90% beef. It sounds precise. It sounds like a measurable promise. The consumer belief is that these percentages are consistent and verified. The reality is a little more complicated. Food standards. Australia New Zealand sets compositional requirements for mince products and labelled fat content does need to meet declared values. But there's an important word in food science: tolerance. Batch-to-batch variation in raw material, grind temperature, and the specific cuts being processed all affect fat levels. Consumer testing in other markets. An informal testing published by food bloggers and home cooks in Australia has repeatedly produced results where the cooked down fat yield appears inconsistent with the labelled percentage. Available evidence doesn't suggest widespread deliberate misrepresentation. What it does suggest is that 90% lean is a category claim about a batch average, not a precision guarantee about the specific tray in your hand. For most shoppers, that's a minor concern. For people managing cardiovascular health, calorie-restricted diets, or family meal plans, that variance may actually matter. The bigger issue, though, isn't the fat you can measure. It's the fat you can see cooking off in the pan. Within minutes of hitting a hot surface, many consumers report a significant quantity of grey liquid releasing from supermarket mince before any browning can occur. That's not necessarily a health risk, but it is a cooking performance question, and it connects directly to what we're looking at next. Number 6. Modified atmosphere. Atmosphere, thermospheric packaging. The invisible ingredient in the tray opener supermarket mince tray and the beef looks vivid, bright red, almost luminous. It's visually appealing in a way that home-ground beef simply isn't. Most shoppers attribute that color to freshness. But here's what most shoppers never notice: the small print on the corner of many mince trays that reads, "Packaged in a protective atmosphere." Modified atmosphere packaging, or MAP, is an industry-standard preservation technique that replaces the air inside the sealed tray with a specific blend of gases, typically elevated carbon dioxide and oxygen levels. According to food science literature, the high oxygen environment maintains oxymyoglobin in the meat, the molecule responsible for bright red color. It's legally permitted, widely used, and effective at extending shelf life. The concern raised by some consumer advocates isn't that MAP is dangerous. It's that it creates a visual impression of freshness that isn't necessarily connected to the product's actual age or quality. Beef that was processed several days ago can still look newly butchered under MAP conditions. Some researchers have also noted that MAP packaged mince can release gas when opened, and that the color change consumers see when they break the seal, the brief gray or purple stage before the meat reoxygenates, is sometimes mistaken for spoilage. That misunderstanding leads some shoppers to discard perfectly safe product. And conversely, it means the visual cues shoppers have traditionally used to assess freshness may no longer reliably apply to sealed supermarket mince. That's a transparency issue, and it connects directly to a bigger one: what the use-by date is actually measuring. Numbering 5 use-by dates, the date on the packet and the date it was made. This might be the most misunderstood label in the entire cold section. Shoppers overwhelmingly believe that a use-by date tells them when the product was made, or at minimum gives them a consistent window of freshness. The reality is that use-by dates are set by the manufacturer, not by a government authority, and they're calculated from the date of packaging, not necessarily the date the animal was processed or the beef was ground. That's not inherently a problem. Use-by dates are based on validated shelf life testing, and FSANZ has rules about how they're set. But the gap between animal processing date and packaging date in a high-volume industrial supply chain can be days. And the gap between packaging date and your shopping basket can be several more. Public records show that the Australian food recall system, managed by Food Standards Australia and New Zealand, does document instances of mince products being recalled for elevated microbial counts, primarily E. microbial counts, primarily E. coli or salmonella. These recalls are publicly listed and available on the FSANZ website. What they reveal is that the use-by date and the actual microbial condition of the product at time of purchase are not the same thing. This is not a reason to panic. Proper refrigeration and handling are the main protective factors for consumers, and recalls are relatively rare. But the consumer belief that a use-by date is a safety guarantee, rather than a manufacturer's estimate under ideal conditions, is worth gently challenging. We'll come back to recalls specifically at number 2. Because that part of the story gets more specific. Number 4 marketing language, natural frisch and no frisch, and no ADD preservatives. Walk the mince aisle with fresh eyes and count how many times you see the words natural, fresh, or premium. Now ask yourself, what is any of those words actually required to mean? The answer under current Australian food law is very little. No added preservatives is a factual claim. If accurate, it means no artificial preservatives were added. That doesn't mean the product has a shorter shelf life or a simpler supply chain. Modified atmosphere packaging, as we covered, is a physical preservation process, not a chemical one. So that claim can coexist with MAP. Natural has no regulated definition in Australian food labelling. It's a marketing descriptor. According to consumer advocacy reporting from Source Australia, natural claims on food products create strong positive impressions in consumer research, Carter meter, but carry no enforceable standard. Premium similarly has no defined benchmark. A premium mince tray can contain the same cuts, the same sourcing, and the same process as a standard tray. Some critics argue the marketing language around supermarket mince creates a different impression than the product necessarily delivers. This matters because consumers are making real purchasing decisions based on these terms. They're paying more for words that, on close inspection, mean less than they appear to. Smart shopping starts with knowing which labels carry weight and which are pure positioning. But that, at least, is a known unknown, a place where consumers can be educated. The next one on the list is different, because most shoppers have no idea it's happening. Number 3, trim quality. What's cutsarakanly in the mind? And here was well cutsarakanly in the minds. Here's where things get genuinely interesting. Consumers typically imagine mince as ground beef, perhaps a secondary cut like chuck or round, but fundamentally recognizable meat. The reality of industrial beef mince is a little more nuanced. Mince is, by nature, an end product. It can be produced from a wide range of beef trimmings, the material left over after primary cuts are removed. Those trimmings vary significantly in quality, in the ratio of connective tissue to muscle, and in the cuts they originate from. Under Australian food standards, mince labelled as beef mince must contain beef, but there is no requirement for the specific cuts used to be disclosed. Consumer groups in Australia and the UK have conducted testing that found significant variation in the muscle tissue quality of standard supermarket mince compared to butcher ground mince using disclosed cuts. Food scientists note that the texture, binding capacity, and cooking performance of mince can differ substantially based on trim quality, which may explain why some home cooks report supermarket mince cooking down more dramatically in volume than their butcher's equivalent. Available evidence doesn't suggest any of this is illegal. It's an industry standard practice that is legal, common, and rarely discussed with shoppers. But the consumer belief that mince is simply ground beef from a recognizable part of the animal may not always align with the industrial reality of trim-based production. And that reality becomes significantly more important when you understand the supply chain context, which is exactly what number 1 covers. But before we get there, let's talk about number 2. Number 2, recall versus alibi. How hard it's to know if your Mince has been recalled. Australia has a functional food recall system. When a product is withdrawn from shelves due to safety concerns, contamination, mislabeling, or microbial issues, it's listed publicly on the FSANZ recall databases. Supermarkets are required to remove recall products and, in serious cases, contact purchasers. Here's the consumer problem. Most people have no idea this database exists, let alone how to use it. In the period from 2019 to 2024, the FSANZ Recall Register lists multiple incidents involving fresh beef mince products, spanning contamination concerns and labelling errors across major national brands and supermarket-owned labels. Official recall notices for these products stated that consumers who had purchased the affected products should not consume them and should return them for a refund. The concern isn't that recalls happen. Recalls are part of a functioning safety system. The concern is the gap between a recall being issued and a consumer actually hearing about it. If you buy a product on a Monday and it's recalled on a Thursday, the communication chain from FSANZ to retailer to you relies on you checking the news, checking the database, or the supermarket reaching out. For many consumers, none of those things reliably happen. Some shoppers reported only discovering a product they'd consumed had been recalled weeks or months after the fact. That's not a criminal failure, it's a structural communication problem. But it's a problem that falls most heavily on the consumers who are least equipped to navigate government databases. The bigger picture issue here isn't just mince. It's a broader question about how visible supply chain problems actually are to end consumers. And that brings us to the concerns sitting at number 1. Number 1 global supplications. Weisen global supplications. Weisen the Wages supermarket minds. This is the one most consumers never think to ask, because the answer isn't anywhere on the packaging. When you buy a Woolworths branded beef mince or a Coles branded beef mince, the product has been sourced through a supply chain that typically involves a third-party processor, a large-scale beef processing facility that produces product for multiple retail brands simultaneously. That facility might, at different points in the year, be supplying the same or functionally similar product under different labels at different price points. Own label products in Australian supermarkets are not made by the supermarkets. They're contracted to processors who bid for supply contracts. Those contracts can change. The processor making Woolworths beef mince this year may not be the processor making it next year. The facility quality, the sourcing geography, and the trim specifications in the contract can shift between cycles without any visible change on the packaging. Consumer advocates argued this creates an accountability gap. When a branded product from a named processor has a quality or safety issue, the chain of responsibility is relatively clear. When an own label product from a contracted facility has a problem, the line between retailer responsibility and processor responsibility becomes a legal and public relations question. This doesn't mean own label mince is worse than branded mince. In some cases, own-label products come from the same facilities as premium brands, but the opacity of the supply chain means consumers have almost no way of making an informed comparison. The same label, the same price, the same shelf position, and potentially a completely different product depending on when the supply contract was last renegotiated. The concern isn't any one brand. It's the structural invisibility of a system most consumers don't know exists. What to buy instead? So with all of that in mind, what does a well-informed consumer actually do at the Mince counter? The first option is verified supermarket branded Mince with full country of origin disclosure. Both Coles and Woolworths carry lines that include the Australian percentage bar prominently, with documented local sourcing. These aren't perfect in every dimension we've covered, but they represent the more transparent end of the own label spectrum. Best for budget-conscious shoppers who want a reliable everyday option without a premium price. The second option is value-branded Mince from regional processors. Brands like Watsonia or similar independent labels sold in IGA and independent supermarkets. These tend to have more consistent traceability because the processor is named and accountable on the label. They're not necessarily more expensive, and the supply chain is generally shorter and more visible. Best for shoppers who want the supermarket convenience with slightly better accountability. The third option is certified premium product. Things like grass-fed certified beef mince, or product carrying MSA grading, or certified Australian Angus beef as verification. These come with independent certification that the marketing language on standard mince often lacks. The fat content, the breed provenance, and the production standard are all independently verified. Best for households where quality and dietary consistency matter and the budget allows. The fourth option is your local butcher, full stop. A butcher who grinds in store can tell you the cut, the fat ratio, the farm of origin in many cases, and the date it was ground. There is no map packaging, no trim ambiguity, and no own label supply chain mystery. Many independent butchers are competitive in price on beef mince specifically because it's a volume product they use to drive foot traffic. Best for consumers who have the access and want maximum transparency. Here's what today comes down to. Supermarket mince is, for the vast majority of shoppers in most circumstances, safe and fit for purpose. The issues we've covered aren't reasons to be afraid of Tuesday night bolognas. They're reasons to be a more informed consumer in a category where the packaging does quite a lot of work to prevent you from asking questions. The 3 questions worth asking at the Mince counter are simple. Who made this? Is the processor named, or is it an own label mystery? What cut is in here? Does the label commit to anything specific, or is it just the word beef? And is this certified or self-declared? Is that premium or natural claim backed by an independent standard, or is it just marketing copy? If you can answer all 3, you're shopping smarter than 90% of the people in that aisle. If this investigation gave you something useful, drop your biggest takeaway in the comments. We read everything, and we'll pin the best ones. If you think this is worth sharing with someone who shops on autopilot, send it their way. And if you want to follow along as we keep pulling at these threads, subscribe and hit the bell. There's a lot more of this kind of content coming. The content in this video is produced for educational and informational purposes only. All claims are based on publicly available sources including government recall databases, published food science literature, consumer advocacy reporting, and publicly available food labeling regulations. Consumer experiences with specific products vary, and individual results may differ. Product formulations, sourcing arrangements, and supply chain practices change over time. Information accurate at the time of production may not reflect current manufacturer or retailer practices. This video does not constitute legal, medical, or dietary advice. Viewers are encouraged to conduct their own research and consult relevant professionals for guidance specific to their circumstances. No brand mentioned in this video is accused of illegal conduct. All content reflects publicly available information and general industry practices.